And I know we're being recorded, so I just for the record, I want to put out there that I am not against AI any way, shape, or form. I think it's brilliant foundation, and I think that in the next years to come, it is going to be the largest skyscraper. If I could put that analogy, it's going to be, you know, it is going to replace a lot of jobs. It's also going to enhance a lot of jobs. There's a number
Absolutely.
of jobs. There's a number of jobs that, thinking back to my heritage, some of the people that came to this country, they were icemen, where they took a block of ice up to a building, to an apartment in the lower parts of Manhattan or Brooklyn, and they put a block of ice
Okay.
into a
Yeah.
box. And then that's what
Yep.
they did. And then refrigeration happened. So what'd they do? Well, they had a truck and they said, well, we could cart stuff. And they started selling kerosene because kerosene was heating homes. So then they had a truck, they were getting kerosene, and that's what they were doing. And then kerosene went out of business. So what they have to do? They had to evolve, and they opened up gas stations because cars became more prominent. You know, it's going to happen. It's the evolution of things. It's always going to be evolving.
And I think taking sort of all or nothing position versus AI or versus evolution is even the wrong approach to think about it. And that comes really, you have a very flexible workforce. And I know from previous conversations, you also work with community engagement. Again, I'm sort of going into the supply chain and also into the sustainability, which, as we discussed, is made of three parts, right? The environment, we talked about the sourcing, the carbon footprint, for instance, of parts, and then about the community, which is part of the people, right? In the what we call it the three P's of, and also you talked about profitability, right? So when we come back to the workforce, and especially in this time of AI, and let's call it, it's a craze about AI at the moment. You have to have it regardless if you do actually use it or not. What do you do in terms of training, internship partnerships, especially that you work also with unions, veterans, you work with the community at large, and I think a lot of your volunteering is actually for community.
Yeah, it's all about it. As I said to you in previous conversations, there's two reasons why I do it. One is to pay it forward because if it wasn't for the people in my life, such as my wife and some mentors that I hold very close, near and dear, and talk to them sometimes daily, weekly, and I understand the benefits that this industry has provided me is not just because of me, it's because there were people that helped me identify what path I should try to pursue. And so, for that reason, I work with the communities. There's a couple of non for profits. I just didn't get approval, so I don't want to name them. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, it's all there. But that being said, it's supporting veterans in transition from military to civilian life and giving them a chance to apply their skill sets, their attributes, the skill sets that they've honed in on while serving in the military to put that into the ICT community. It's also working with emerging professionals who maybe they're currently in the ICT community, but at a different capacity. Maybe they're at sales or operations or vice versa. And we try to help them, hone in on what they find important, interesting, and we network with all of them. We one of the non for profits that we work with, we do a university challenge annually, and what that's about is we get a bunch of engineering students from you. It's pretty much 4 or 5 different colleges in the Northeast, and they each come up with a conceptual design to support the data center at some capacity. So it could be from IT, AV, security, power, cooling, and then we have them present. So it's not only teaching them about, their engineering abilities, it's also teaching them on how to present, how to conduct themselves in a professional setting, because these are the next generation. So I take pride in these things because, again, the first reason I do it, I try to pay it forward. The second reason I do it is for my family and my business, is to ensure the longevity that, the success that we had for the last 50 years, it continues for another 50. That's why I do it.
It's first thing, congratulations, and definitely full support for what you're doing. I was listening to the transition of military to civilian lives, and that reminds me that a lot of people coming to our association, the AKFI, which is a sustainability nonprofit. They are asking us, how do I transition to sustainability jobs? How do I get certified? What should I change? Because they feel, and it's very interesting, people in the middle of the careers, and definitely military to civilian, it's a big change of career, big change of direction.
Absolutely.
They start to realize that they have to leave an inheritance to the next generation and generations, and this is the planet. And I'm not talking in a very abstract way and so on. They want to contribute. They want to make sure that we don't destroy, the planet with our activities.
Oh,
And again,
absolutely.
yeah, and it's very encouraging to hear that from a small medium company you approach this in a very practical way, because there are books written on how to transition, but you
Well,
can read 10 books and they don't know what to do.
the biggest thing is one of, and again, having served in the United States Navy, I'm not saying anything bad about country and or military service. I got my DD 214 processed out, honorable discharge, and I love the time that I served in the United States Navy. However, you can't forget the fact that the military, the branches of the service in any country, it's a business, right? So there is a manning document that shows we have how many recruits coming in and how many people retiring. And we have to fill those billets of responsibility to stay mission ready. That's their concern. When you say, I'm not reenlisting, it goes, okay, fill this piece of paper out and see you later. The thing that I try to bring back is when you first join the military, any branch of service, there's a basic introduction to the branch of service that you chose. You go in, whether you enlist or you go through an officer candidate school, there's several weeks and or months for basic training in your A school where you're going. So then that goes into your first duty assignment, your first station, right? And that could be 2 years to 4 years. So if you do your first enlistment, anywhere between, depending again, officer or enlisted, it's different for both. It could be anywhere from 2, 4, or 6 years in your first enlistment or your first tour being an officer.
Very
And
interesting.
your only mission is to do that job that fits in those four walls, right? They're not telling you about anything else outside of those four walls because their mission is primary, right?
Right.
That's the primary focus. Secondary is you, right? They don't do anything bad to you. I'm saying from my own experience, but the primary concern is the mission. So now
Right.
you focus on that 2 to 6 year time, and you're learning backwards and forwards how to do that job, that MOS, right? The military rating, whatever you are. And that's the only thing that you learn to do. Now, the transition, it's time for you to leave. They give you a piece of paper in every branch of service, and they tell you go to report to a transition assistance program class, which is only a half a day. And they say, get this piece of paper signed by your chain of command before you depart. And that's it. Have a great life. And there are resources. Don't get me wrong. There are many,
Understand.
many resources that the military and the federal government offer assistance in helping you transition. However, they're not well in advertising because, again, it's the mission and then the individual. So once, if you could think about that, and people that are listening, you think about that, from 2 to 6 years, you're programmed or you're trained to only do that one particular set of rules and responsibilities. And now within a week's time, it's like, goodbye, go find some other work. And in most cases, it works out if people transition from a similar responsibility into the civilian workforce. The other case, like myself, I didn't. I had, from a security background, but physical security didn't transfer into the IT community. So
Mm.
if it wasn't for the mentors and people opening my eyes to say, well, you're detailed oriented, you're energetic, you have a great disposition, um, you are detailed oriented, you know, I could introduce you to this. And I started as a contractor, and then from a contractor, I went into the manufacturing side, and now had the opportunity to invest into a well-standing fine oil machine distribution company.
And I think I'll take two tracks in the same time. That this conversation leads first to maybe the interconnection that you mentioned between civil life and military life is the same with the interconnection of the parts between old or previous generation of equipment and current generation. But as you mentioned, also things are changing very rapidly. New technologies are coming fast and furious, right? We talked before the taping that we have smart buildings now, and they require or smart trains, and they require special care, and you have to integrate. You constantly have to integrate, and the integration is the sort of the deep secret. The other part you brought also is humans help humans. You have to be human. Yes, the machines, or as you said, you leave the military, they give you a quick course and say, here is the rest of the world.
Have fun.
Uh, have fun,
Thanks for
have
your
fun.
service. Have fun.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you for your service. And then this transition, it's actually very very important also in sustainability, supply chains transition, right? As you mentioned, and all this process. On one hand, has to be very organized, very tightly controlled. In the other hand, it's like spinning at even more rapid and rapid rapid speeds.
Right.
So,
I mean, a lot of
how do you
companies
see
out
the?
there,
Yeah,
well, I was just going to add to that. A lot of companies out there are putting band-aids on a lot of equipment that they're unaware what the actual purpose of that equipment is, rather than understand that piece of equipment, because all those people that used to be responsible for it are retired. They no longer exist in the workforce. So they, all that the company XYZ knows is, don't turn that piece of equipment off, keep it running, because we don't want it to go down.
sure.
I remember being at a telecom, a carrier's facility, and I will not say the carrier, and the raised floor that all the cable was going under was buckling because they had bundles and bundles and bundles of category cables, Cat 3, Cat 5, Cat 5E, 6, 6A, all stacked on top of each other, going through the floors, and it was buckling the floor. And I remember as a contractor, I said, thinking it from a financial gain, I said, oh, we can come in here and recable. And the guy that was on scene, the site manager, he's like, don't touch anything, that'll shut down the entire city. Like, we don't know. Like, don't, and it was that comical. But people continue to put these band-aids on because as we transition, as people get older and they're coming into the later years of their career, there's not a proper transition and handover, not turnover, but handover. So like I was saying earlier, many of the employees that are with our company, they've been with us since the 1990s, and we love them. We appreciate them and we respect them. But at the same time, now me, my partners, and we have to make a conscious effort to hire other people that probably have less experience, not as much knowledge as those, and not fire any of those other employees, but have them work together so that in 2, 3, 4, 5, how many years, there's a smoother transition so that when they are ready to go, it's like, I wish you the best. Here's the gold wash, and have a great life. You know,
Yep.
we're in good hands. And that goes back to our customers so that it's seamless. They don't have to see how the sausage is made. They just need to eat it, right? You don't want
Right.
to see how sausage is made. So I hope I didn't ruin that for anybody. But you love how it tastes, so unless you're a vegan, of course. But that being said, this is a transition that many companies are failing to do. They're not looking at the future, the longevity. They're saying, I'm just going to get AI software, and AI software will take care of that job. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier, is that, like many of us know, it's junk in, junk out. If you don't have the right question to ask, it's not going to output, it's not going to provide you with the right answer. It's going to give you a version of the
Sure.
truth.
Or even hallucinate, make up the make up a thing because
Or a
AI.
fabrication, or a
Yeah,
fabrication that could be wrong and costly.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
that adage is measure twice, cut once.
Yep.
It's very applicable in our space. So that's again where I said earlier in this meeting, um, we or I say me, I struggle with turning that switch on and saying, okay, let AI handle it.
No,
I like to have that customer
AI
touch.
can replace the librarian, right? So if somebody is looking for a part and wants to get a picture of the part from the stockroom, AI will find it in seconds, right? Otherwise, you need to other systems, you need to go between systems. So it has its own qualities. But one thing or two things we learn about AI. One in AKFI, we are saying that data was made by humans for humans. So all these spreadsheets, all the systems we have so far, the CRMs of the world, they're all fed by people, even with
Right.
automation, even with IoT. And AI is not a person. AI doesn't have a hunch, right? It's like this part doesn't look right. I don't know why. I don't need to know why, but it's not the part you're looking for because it doesn't fit. It's not going to do the job that we want to do. And this kind of diagnostic we talked about, it is not part of AI. AI knows the parts. They can tell you all the details and everything. Can show
And
pictures.
there's a lot of manuals that have been restricted to provide to open AI and other
So
perplexity and other chat gpt, whatever source you're using. There's a lot of guidance and regulations that have put in front of many people, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that
absolutely.
are not following those rules, but I know that from the organizations that I deal with, they've been very adamant about that, and I respect them for that.
I
I might disagree, but there's
I can tell you that the other problem of AI, so one, data is made by people, and the other problem is companies have data everywhere but nowhere to be found, right? Because it's in different, sometimes in drawers, in hard copy, as you said, sometimes in the mind of people that
I was
worked
just
in the
going to
company
say
for
right here.
20 years. Yeah, exactly. And it's like we're doing this way because we tried it three different ways, and we figure out this is the best way, the most efficient way, the most sustainable way. But I want to bring also the conversation on the supply chain, focus a little bit on the supply chain. And you mentioned standards, you mentioned certifications. We didn't mention ISO 9001, which is one of the grandfathers of all the ISO standards in sustainability and so on. I'm not sure if ISO would like to talk about that, but we'll keep it as a secret.
Well, I
Yeah.
can tell you from a supply chain standpoint, one of the things that we pride ourselves in, not only the level of service that our people provide, but the partnerships that we very consciously look at. So there's been countless times where I'll get emails, phone calls. My partners will get the same on a daily, weekly basis where they're reaching out to us and say, sell our cable, sell our jack, sell our panel, sell this, sell that. And it's like, well, no, because we don't know you. We don't know what your company's about. We don't understand your sustainable goals. We don't understand your platform. We don't understand your vision. We don't understand your history. We're unaware of who you are, company
Right.
XYZ. So we tend to, even though we have access to hundreds of manufacturers, I would say the hundreds of manufacturers that we work with very closely, they're all been tested. They either UL, ETL, ISO themselves, and they're doing the initiatives for green initiatives and sustainability, and they stand by their people and their product and their process. There's been a few times in the 8 years that I've been with Wise Components where there was a situation where a product failed, but within a 48-hour period, those manufacturers stepped up to the plate, not only paid the contractors and the end users for the downtime, not only paid for that, paid for the product, but paid for the
Mm-hmm.
install and removal of the product. If you are working with a less expensive brand, sometimes good, sure. But I love this, and I think when we first met, I told you the commercial that I love so much. I have to give credit to Esurance, but it's the greatest commercial ever, in my opinion. And it picture this, guy running to the gas station and he's really hungry, and he sees a sale on sushi. So they say, sushi, cheap sushi, good, cheap gas station sushi, not so good. And it cuts to him after eating it, running to the outhouse, regretting his choices. So in that same sense, I'm not saying that because you paid less for that product, it's inferior. But you have to ask yourself this: the companies that you deal with out there, you listeners, whether it be mine or another company out there, understand the company that they keep, that they're reputable, reliable resources for you to use, that you're not doing rework, because that's going to be more costly in the end, as we all know. So
Sure.
we make a conscious effort to work with reputable manufacturers that have
Yeah.
been tested over and over and over again. And if they do have a failure, they step up to the plate to ensure safety, well being, and the success for the client and the contractor and the partnerships that we serve. And that's one thing that I say very wholeheartedly. Yes, can you get it cheaper? Maybe, probably. But let the buyer beware when they're cheap, inexpensive, sure. Cheap, bad word.
And by the way, that brings also the topic of ESG. I know it's early. Primarily, large companies are moving in that direction under the new regulations in Europe and in California, as I mentioned, especially in the U.S., New York State as well. Do you see a demand, not a demand, but do you see questions about how sustainable is this part? Because I need to put it in a more sustainable, let's say a new a new hyperscaler, a new data center, and they need to go to report on ESG, right? These are very large companies that need to report
I
on
think
water, on electricity. Do you see
I
questions coming?
yeah, I mean, there's great companies out there built, with automation built into them. I know we work with one in particular comes to mind, MHT. MHT can integrate with just about anything with an IP address. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just providing, lights on and off or blinds open or close. It's going into the building amenities, the utilities, giving it a full optics of what your bill, how efficient or inefficient one's building is running. Because
Right.
there are regulations out there in many states, and they are fining many building owners on not being a letter grade of A or greater, B or greater. So the fines right now, from my understanding, a lot of building owners, because they're anybody, like I'm a business owner, so you're always looking at the ROIs when you're investing in a program, a software, a new truck, a new tool, a new product, new inventory, and you look at the ROIs. So right now, where we're at in the scales of economy, a lot of landowners or building owners, what they're doing is they're looking at these fines as OPEX, and
Mm-hmm.
they're building it into their operational costs. Eventually,
Okay.
they're gonna build up a higher fine and less tolerance for those fines, and also the scales of economy on are going to come down. If you remember back in the early 90s when you had a flat screen TV, 30 inches, it cost 10 grand.
Right.
Nowadays you can go into Walmart and buy an 80-inch TV for probably $500. you know so once the scales of economy come down to be a little bit more cost effective, um, I think building owners and data center owners are going to be more susceptible to deploy solutions that are going to oversee all the equipment that they have within the building and or data center, that will give them more of an understanding. It's, again, I use lights because it's a very easy thing to grasp in concept. But when you're putting power to a light, you're not just turning it on and off. You're giving it a certain amount of power. So you're providing
Mm-hmm.
it the same amount of power that you would power your toaster, your blender, your refrigerator. And a small light that just illuminates 120 square foot or 200 square foot room doesn't need the same amount of power. So these companies are able to power provide less power to each fixture. Um, there's a number of things that I'm seeing from a cabling infrastructure. Another thing that came up in many conferences that I attend is single pair Ethernet opposed to four pair,
Mm-hmm.
because it's less expensive to make, less expensive to buy, and there's a need that serves it could serve your security cameras, wireless access points, and many other things where you don't need the extra pairs. So it's helping reduce the footprint that's going into steel conduit, or even being deployed overhead in J hooks. It's just less waste in manufacturing. So again, talking about the green
You have
initiative.
a very, very good example because many times um, people working in sustainability, they're saying sustainability is expensive, you cannot pay for it, or you have to budget for it, the different versions of the same story. And actually, this kind of thinking, right? Uh, Using the progress of technology, using the knowledge that we can acquire through AI, through people talking to people, transferring knowledge. That's where the secret is for sustainable companies, sustainable industries, and every little piece count. I really saw a great example when you say, look, you can control the lights not only on and off, but you can control the amount of energy by measuring the amount of light you want in the room.
Right.
Or
And then also you're integrating in a big office building. If you have all these large windows, as many of these office buildings do during the day, if you have all these lights that are next to the window, you didn't need all those lights to project so many lumens, right?
yep.
So the wattage that's going to be provided then is significantly reduced, and you can only do that on a managed system. So something that has some type of artificial intelligence. It's not going to be somebody saying light on, light off, light on, light off. And there's people that do that job in many buildings throughout the world, and they probably
They
make a
go
good
there.
living. So the class 4 power system design, fault managed power, Panduit, Leviton, CommScope, there's so many now that are focused on integrating AC DC into one, right? So we saw
Right.
in Texas several years ago, before COVID happened, the Sinclair Hotel, which was built, I think, in the 1920s or 30s originally, but then in the early 2000s, it was revamped. And I don't think it has an electrical panel in the entire hotel. Everything's done on low voltage infrastructure. Everything is that has the ability to have a report. Um, you and I were at a conference in Vegas, and I was fortunate enough to take a tour of Resorts World Casino, and I went on the back tour. They didn't show me the counting room. I wanted to, but they didn't. They showed
Okay.
me an exclusive penthouse that they don't advertise on their website, but it's basically half of their top floor, and every switch, every outlet, every port, every appliance, fireplace, everything is based on a network switch. Is connected to a network switch. So if the facility management team doesn't need to send people up there to see if anything's broken, if anything's not working, properly, they'll get a
Mm-hmm.
report and they'll say, "Hey, go up to the 66th floor because there's an outage, there's a spill, right? There's other things like that. It could test for if there's a leak somewhere." So it doesn't need a person to go and inspect physically every single hour, every single day. But when it does happen, it's going to need somebody because the robot's not there yet. Eventually, that'll be the next phase. But right
Actually,
now,
2 years before, I was in the same resort for a hotels conference, and I took a tour of their sustainability, their cooling systems, and so on, the cleaning, the sorting of the garbage. They have a big sorting
yes,
facility where they separate, recyclable. And was impressive actually the amount of effort conserving water, which is a big issue especially in Nevada, especially in Las Vegas.
yeah.
So I remember you reminding me about that tour of the facilities, and that are impressive what they are doing in, as you said, and as a tourist, as a visitor, as a guest, you never figure out that that's working there in the background. There is a big sustainability project moving on, chugging along, as you said, and moving. But I'd like to invite you back, but I don't want to let you go yet. And I have a question about what advice you have for aspiring professionals. We touch on that already in the discussions, especially transition from military to civilian life, back to civilian life. But there are many aspiring professionals. Some are students and new grads moving towards sustainability. Some of them are moving in middle of the career. And I'm sure you may have some very good advice for them.
I don't know if it's good, but it's my advice.
Okay,
Uh,
we take
as
what
a, as a,
we take what we can.
yeah, as a hiring manager, hiring authority, the things that I look for is the right attitude, the level of enthusiasm, person to be open-minded. Don't be bogged down by change. Change is I understand not always received to be good, but we need to be able to be agile and adapt to what's happening. As I use the example about the iceman that later became the kerosene person, the later that owned the gas station. This evolution is going to happen. It's the inevitable. Change is inevitable. Whether it happens at 20 or it happens at 60, it's going to happen. You might retire doing the same thing. Highly unlikely if you're starting out in your career now in your 20s. What the world we know is going to change in the next 30, 40 years drastically.
Absolutely.
But I would, listening to this, is that, keep an open mind and be, enthusiastic to learning new things. Because one of the things I put on my LinkedIn profile is I'm a student always, and I don't attend any school, but I read a ton of books and articles, and constantly wanting to learn more on how it could evolve, how it could even be a better parent. So it's it's those things that I think will let anybody go a long way, whether they're transitioning, as you said, half in their career from the military, from a university, from a high school or vocational school. Have the right attitude, be energetic, be enthusiastic to new opportunity, because you don't know what the door ahead, stands in front of the door open unless you open it, right? So,
Absolutely.
so
And
I would say that.
again, I would like to thank you. I would like to thank you for taking the time today to visit with us, for a lot of
My pleasure.
wisdom. And I invite, who will join us and watch the video. And as I said, we also store them on YouTube, so they are ready to be watched later on. Um, and for our audience, make sure to tune in every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talks series. You'll gain new perspectives, always new perspectives on how to mitigate the risks and create value by integrating ESG and digital transformation, and I shall say AI. Until the next week, goodbye from AKFI and from Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel.